Okay, can we get started again? Thank you.
Never mind, she got it.
The fact that you know each other and are talking to each other is a good sign, but we should reconvene. So, thank you all. If you look down on this end, you'll see this person does not look like Edith Ramirez. Chuck Harwood has joined us. So, FTC, welcome. Okay, I think we're ready for our second panel. For those of us up here, I have learned that we have people with us who are diligently listening and watching through the webinar, but are having a hard time hearing. So if the microphone is not tickling your nose, it's not close enough. So make sure you really pull it close if you can so they can hear us. All right, we're going to do the second panel. They have a big task to go through the rest of the recommendations, and there are 5 of them. So let me introduce the panel. The subject of this panel is improving awareness of and intervention in elder abuse, neglect, and exploitation. And they're going to do the last 5 of the 9 working group recommendations. And let's see, we're going to start with Stacy Rogers from Social Security Administration, works closely with Carolyn. Jennifer Duane and Naomi Karp from the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. David Spiegel from the Federal Trade Commission. I think David was with us at the IOM forum, I remember last month. So these recommendations are going to seek to improve the overall awareness of elder abuse. And they're going to discuss, much like the same structure of the first group, the recommendations, the outcomes, and the current status, next step. I'm going to just do timekeeping. We are scheduled for about 45 more minutes. We won't be immediately leaving, but somehow you all have a good task to get through 5 real quickly. So we look forward to your presentations.
Good afternoon. Again, I'm Stacy Rogers from the Social Security Administration. I have the pleasure of serving as the Senior Advisor to Acting Commissioner Carolyn Colvin. This afternoon, I'm pleased to present on behalf of the Public Policy and Awareness Subcommittee. And our subcommittee, our recommendation is to develop a public awareness campaign. In terms of this particular campaign, what we mean is to develop a strategic, multifaceted public awareness campaign, which includes multiple types of strategies, media relations, public service announcements, online tools, etc. And a lot of our work has been guided by one of the white papers that was submitted by one of our experts who attended the initial council meeting in October, Hillary Zumba. In Hillary's paper and through our own research and findings over the last few months, there are quite a few campaigns in existence. Our subcommittee has done a preliminary review, an environmental scan to look at what exists, and we've found about 17 different awareness campaigns on the associated topic. But as Hillary's paper presented, there is no comprehensive connectivity among these campaigns or these resource tools. And what we need is a strategic social marketing campaign designed both to increase public awareness and the understanding of the problem, because that is another issue that we have observed, that the definition of elder abuse, there are multiple perceptions and iterations. So what we have worked on thus far, and we noted, is that there are so many different sub-audiences that a campaign like this would need to address. We would need to address family members, the faith community, various levels of government, government agencies, the healthcare industry, service providers, and also those who have experienced exploitation themselves. We talked a little bit about, in the first set of recommendations, how difficult it is for individuals who have been abused to come forward, let alone know where to find the information and then access it. So we believe that as we move forward, we want to be able to look at the desired outcomes of reaching the diverse populations through a collaborated effort with federal agencies and other partners, which would include the private and philanthropic community, because we can't do this alone. We also want to ensure that whatever it is that we are presenting, that the messaging is appropriate for the sub-audiences. And third, in that we recognize at this point in time there are no resources, no dedicated resources right now for such a campaign, and we recognize that there will be a need for resources. But in the interim, how can we use what we have more effectively and to use low-cost or no-cost mechanisms to promote this effort? Our current status. It's really exciting, the work that our group has been doing, because it's brought a group of agencies together, HHS, DOJ, CFPB, FTC, of course SSA, and the U.S. Postal Inspection Service together in dialogue in a way that I must say we haven't had in the past. And as a result of our dialogue, we have been able to communicate better and recognize where right now we communicate among ourselves to better protect individuals. But we also want to learn from our partners who have already developed and implemented campaigns, and looking at the work that's been done already, what can we learn, and also what gaps are there that we can fill as we go forward. The subcommittee is also cataloging, as I said, current and recent elder abuse campaigns, and hopefully we will be able to use these in an effective way. We also are reviewing the 2010 Rheingold Report, Elder Abuse Prevention Campaign, a research report and communication plan. Our goal is to build upon the work that has already been done. This particular report is there and accessible for us, so we will continue to work on that. We're also going to ensure that in terms of whatever the overall goal of the campaign, we must identify the target audiences, what the appropriate messaging is, and look at the full range of implementation strategies, which of course we want to utilize technology, but also remembering, as I think we know from our population as Social Security, everyone is not going to go online. Everyone is not going to search for information through technology. So we have to keep that in mind as we plan. The last thing that I think is important that we want to recognize is that we have to engage the private philanthropic community as well to see if we can do some cost sharing. There are some models of other campaigns, not necessarily just in this area of concern, that have effectively pooled resources together to present a theme or a campaign, if you will, to broadly educate the community, sharing costs around a common goal. So that's one of the things that we're very interested in, looking at those models and ensuring that we can bring that together, because we do know we do not have resources dedicated for a large-scale campaign. And last, the one thing that we've found in the campaigns that we've reviewed thus far is there has been a coordinated contractor, a formal communications contractor who led the effort in coordination with agencies and the community, and guided the effort to successful implementation. So one of the recommendations that we do have as a subcommittee is that we consider having a contractor to guide us in this work and help to facilitate the full development of the broader campaign, utilizing the information and other campaigns that are there, that we can coordinate them together. Okay.
Thank you, Stacy. Jennifer Dwayne with the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, recommendation 6.
Thank you very much. Let me get myself coordinated. Our recommendation is to develop training to educate stakeholders across multiple sectors and disciplines on preventing, detecting, intervening, and responding to elder abuse, neglect, and exploitation. There is no doubt that education and training on elder abuse is critically needed for healthcare professionals, law enforcement personnel, social service agencies, adult protective services, and others who have contact with vulnerable older adults. Under recommendation 6, the training, we would be gathering up trainings that are already in existence and drawing from best practices and hopefully creating a central database of training resources for providers. Our desired outcomes: increased detection of elder abuse and exploitation, earlier and coordinated intervention strategies to aid and support victims of elder abuse, improved capacity of first responders to address suspected elder abuse and exploitation, and cross-pollination of these efforts between multiple sectors and disciplines. Through multidisciplinary training, it is important that we increase the detection of elder financial exploitation, and as I often have said, early intervention results in loss prevention. We need to reach medical, legal, social services, and properly train them to respond to the signs and indications of elder abuse. The previous speakers have been talking about team concepts, about coordination and collaboration and public awareness, and this piece would really build on that. It's also, we're talking about the website earlier. What a great way to populate a website. There is nowhere in this country where you can go and one-stop shop, find out what training is available, where the best practices or most promising practices are. And so by pulling all of this together, I am actually aware of a list of training for the financial services industry that was adopted by a state that has mandatory training of financial institutions. To be able to bring all that together into one spot, there's no need for duplication. No, we can just take the best of the best out there and bring it together. Our current status is that several federal agencies, as we heard from the FTC earlier, have already developed training, and we are working on training at the CFPB as well for community members and others. Our target audiences for this training, again, healthcare professionals and providers, aging and disability network, financial services industry, APS professionals, law enforcement, judiciary, and legal services. We had a list of 20 different entities that are on the front lines, that are in direct contact, and we boiled it down to these 5 specific areas that we think is a good target for a coordinated national training effort. Our next steps are identifying collaborating partners, federal partner agencies, nonprofit organizations, professional associations, law enforcement stakeholders, and making determinations about how to tailor the training modules to multiple audiences. There's many different voices out there, many different languages being spoken. The financial service industry speaks one language, law enforcement speaks another language, social services speaks a language, legal services speaks a language. We need to get everybody on the same page and talking to each other. So that is one of our primary challenges, I think, in bringing this together. And then determining appropriate delivery platforms. As I mentioned earlier, the Elder Justice website would be an ideal good start and be a great opportunity to populate that as a one-stop shop. But there are definitely other ways to partner with public and private entities to disseminate information about the availability of this training. And that speaks right to the strategic collaboration for distribution. And that's what I have. Thank you.
Thank you. Naomi Karp, CFPB.
Thank you very much. I am going to present actually the last three recommendations with a little bit of help from my friend David Spiegel of the Federal Trade Commission. And these next three all revolve largely around the issue of financial exploitation, although, as you'll see, one of them actually does extend more broadly, and you'll hear a lot of themes that you've heard already today. So the first recommendation, number 7, is combat financial exploitation in collaboration with industry. And this is talking largely about what the role of the federal government can play in both helping to remove barriers that the industry perceives and how we can work together. So I would also like to thank my colleagues. We had a subcommittee on financial exploitation. We had representatives from HHS, DOJ, the U.S. Postal Inspection Service, Treasury, FTC, SEC, and CFPB. So we had representatives of almost all of your agencies, and that made it a very rich discussion. So as I alluded to, the first recommendation is bolster the ability of financial services providers to address financial exploitation. The desired outcome, the goal of this would be to reduce or to remove the perceived barriers, or some of them may actually be actual barriers, so actual or perceived barriers to preventing, identifying, and reporting financial exploitation by the financial services industry. The current status, I'll just mention a few things that are going on right now that we are very excited about and that we can build on. The first is we're developing some guidance for the financial services providers with regard to privacy. We've heard privacy come up a number of times today. There's a lot of concern that we've heard both from the industry directly, from state agencies, from people across the spectrum about they want to be able to report when they suspect that exploitation is going on, but they also know they have obligations to keep personal information private. In particular, they mention a lot the Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act, which has privacy requirements for a whole spectrum of financial services providers. So we are working, the CFPB has spearheaded an initiative to provide guidance to this whole spectrum of providers on the fact that Gramm-Leach-Bliley has a number of exceptions that would permit them to report most primarily to APS and law enforcement. It could also be to the long-term care ombudsman if the possible victim is in a long-term care setting. As mentioned on the slide, the FTC and the SEC are part of this effort, and you should be seeing something coming out on this in the next few months that we're excited about. A second area, and we have to thank our colleagues at Treasury for this, is the use of SARS, suspicious activity reports, to report suspected financial exploitation. Treasury's unit called FinCEN, the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, and I don't have time to give a whole tutorial, but basically there's a reporting process for certain types of crimes that they see, and they use these reports, and the reports go into a database, and they can be accessed by law enforcement all over the country. 2 years ago, in 2011, FinCEN put out an advisory saying you can use SARS to report suspected financial exploitation. And as we've learned recently, because FinCEN took a look at this, the number of SARS reporting this has spiked and continues to grow. So this is a great vehicle. We need to work on this both on the front end, on the back end, and increasing the use of these SARS, but then also getting law enforcement to be aware of it and to be able to draw on this so that we can get more interventions on this. We've already heard talk about a research agenda, and we at the CFPB, along with our colleagues at DOJ and other places, want to specifically drill down on what research do we need in the financial exploitation area. There are just a ton of questions about who are the perpetrators, who are the victims, how are the different types of exploitation different, what interventions work. So we have a lot to learn before we can do more on prevention, detection, and redress. So next steps, I think I've already kind of laid the groundwork for this. One is increasing use of fraud detection tools. We all know about with our credit cards. If we take a trip outside of the country and we didn't tell our card issuer, all of a sudden we may get a hold on our credit card. We're very interested in using those types of software or other tools on the depository side, and so that's something we may be able to work with the private sector on encouraging that. I already talked about the enhanced use of SARS. Jennifer has talked a lot about increasing training among providers. And in a moment, David is going to talk just for a moment about fraud perpetrated via electronic fund transfers. We have the potential for low-cost initiatives here. Providing guidance is not expensive. Collaboration is not necessarily expensive. So that's an exciting area. David, do you want to say a word?
One of the hidden benefits of being a part of this Elder Justice Working Group is working with people like Naomi and other people who have totally different viewpoints and perspectives and really broaden your own perspective. My comments are going to be directed just to EFT, but I don't want to imply by that in any way, and I'm sure you can tell from Chairwoman Ramirez's remarks, that this is the sole area of FTC interest. This is just a particular area that I will be addressing. Today, the panel has heard a great deal of testimony, and I think there's been discussion about third-party fraud against the elderly and the particular areas that they're perpetrated in. One of the less appreciated aspects of that is the aspect of the use of electronic fund transfer devices to facilitate that fraud. And by that I mean things like remotely created checks, automated clearinghouse, devices that enable the fraud perpetrators to do the fraud without getting an actual signature of the person that they're scamming. And of course this has a great deal of importance because it enables asset stripping to move at a fairly rapid pace, given the fact that we now have a very well-developed electronic system. Now, the Commission has had a great deal of experience with the financial services industry, with third-party fraud, and with EFT for the better part of a decade, actually more than a decade, in the Consumer Sentinel. We have actually contributors like Green Dot Corporation, MoneyGram International, and Western Union who contribute complaints to us dealing with EFT issues. But I think the thing that stands out, and that is an important area to address in terms of financial service industry cooperation, is the need, first of all, to get red line data. That's data that enables you to kind of assess when something crosses the line and becomes something that needs to be watched. And number two, of course, is the need for real-time complaint data about the victims of the fraud. Because there's a concept that M.T. Connolly referred to in her testimony of a veil of tears. Once the veil of tears is shed, the victim is already defrauded and the fraud has moved on. So that's a very important aspect of it. We look forward to the work of the Commission in this area and to the continued exchange of views to facilitate these areas. Thank you, Naomi.
Thanks, David. So I will now move along to recommendation number 8, reducing exploitation by fiduciaries. And I was very gratified, not gratified by the problem, but gratified by the attention in the introductory remarks. Both Acting Commissioner Colvin and Deputy Undersecretary Phelan from the VA both mentioned the attention that they're paying to their own fiduciaries, Social Security with its representative payment system, VA with its fiduciaries. These are the people who are making sure that these hard-earned benefits that older people and disabled people across the country are receiving are used actually to meet the basic needs of the people who receive them. Some of them can't handle their own funds, and so they have to have someone appointed to handle them, and Unfortunately, even though it's a small minority, we do see those funds being misappropriated, and we need to come up ways to prevent that, to monitor it, and to do something about it when it happens. So that's kind of what this recommendation is about, reducing financial exploitation by fiduciaries. And when I say fiduciaries, we're also including court-appointed guardians who are appointed by the state courts. So we have certain fiduciaries appointed by state entities, certain being appointed by federal. And then we have some that are private arrangements. We have agents under powers of attorney. We have trustees. All of them are fiduciaries who can handle someone else's money, and they need to do it right, and we need to protect those people. So the recommendation, again, is to reduce financial exploitation by fiduciaries through enhanced oversight and through collaboration among both federal and state entities. We would like to improve the capacity of fiduciaries to handle that. So some of that, as you'll see, has to do with educating them about what their responsibilities are and being proactive. We want to increase information sharing between the benefit-paying agencies and the courts. And again, this is somewhere where privacy issues have come up. Sometimes you could actually have the same beneficiary or the same individual could have a court-appointed guardian, a Social Security rep payee, and a VA fiduciary if they're receiving those benefits and have other funds. We have a very uncoordinated system. If we have a bad actor, the state court might know that this is a bad actor, and Social Security and the VA might not know about it. So we need to increase that information sharing. And we always can do better. We have few resources for oversight, so we need to become more creative about how we oversee them, how we monitor them, so we can pick up when people are straying. Just briefly, the current status. Our Office for Older Americans at the CFPB is producing a set of what we call lay fiduciary guides. These are kind of really basic, plain language roadmaps for people, most of whom are not professionals. They're family members, they're caregivers. All of a sudden, maybe they've never managed someone else's money before, and all of a sudden they have to do it. It's a big responsibility. It's burdensome for them. Most of them want to do the right thing, but they may not know how, and the guides are going to teach them how to do that. And they're also going to teach them about abuse by strangers, scammers, fraudsters, perhaps others who are financially exploiting, so they can protect the person in their charge. We also know that our colleagues at HHS and Social Security have been in discussions about ways to remove these barriers that we talked about before, and they have ideas on how we can deal with some of these privacy issues. So those are some of the things going on right now. So what are the next steps? Again, we need to explore options for collaboration between federal agencies and the state guardianship courts. For one opportunity we may have is there's something now called WINGS, Working Interdisciplinary Networks of Guardianship Stakeholders. Those are state-based task forces that are trying to improve the guardianship system. As feds, we may be able to collaborate with that entity so we can work state by state in connecting up the guardianship courts and the federal agencies that pay benefits. We also should consider evaluation of existing oversight mechanisms and pilot testing new models for oversight. And moving on to recommendation number 9, this recommendation is about improving tools for assessing capacity and vulnerability to financial exploitation. And our recommendation here is about different types of screening tools that we want those frontline people we've been hearing so much about to have in their arsenal so that we can get a better handle on things like, does a person who may be a victim of some type of abuse or neglect, is that person having diminished capacity, and perhaps do they need some protections because they can't really handle their own finances or they can't protect themselves? do we have a screening tool that actually will tell us whether the person has been victimized? And do we have screening tools that will tell us whether someone is vulnerable to being victimized, whether they have been or not? We'd like to improve the ability of Adult Protective Services and the other first responders to screen for all of those things. We think that better assessment tools will enhance prevention, detection, and redress by APS and by all of these many other sort of people in the gatekeeper position. Right now, I think we touched on this a little bit earlier. HHS, DOJ, and CMS, being part of HHS, have identified some of the key screening tools that are currently in use. For example, we know there are about 8 capacity assessment tools. These are short tools that could be utilized in the field. We don't know what APS is using. They may be using different things. They may be using a tool that's outdated. There may be a better one for them to use. So we need to get a better handle on what's out there. We perhaps need to standardize the screening more, and that's something to get a handle on. So what are some things we could do? First of all, I think it's kind of an environmental scan, so we get a better handle on what are the existing validated tools, and who is using the tools, evaluate whether they're the right tools, and then make some recommendations and develop implementation strategies for encouraging both research to develop and pilot better tools and to get them out there. And just as a side note, I just wanted to add one thing. We think about APS, perhaps law enforcement, perhaps the ombudsman being those frontline people, but we also have a lot of people in the private sector. We have other professionals who need to get at least a baseline handle on what they're dealing with. So I know over the years in this field, I've heard a lot from financial services people saying, I think I'm seeing a change in my client. I'm not sure my client really can still handle his or her own money. It could be a broker saying, you know, my client is making weird requests for trades that are totally out of the pattern of before, or I'm seeing this new strange person coming in, and all of a sudden the person, my client, is doing something different. What do I do? Now, we don't want to make all of these people, you know, we don't want all of them implementing mini mental status exam, but we do need to teach them about screening and tools and concepts. They need to have a baseline understanding, so perhaps they can refer someone for a screening. So it's not even just our government first responders. It's really getting some of this information out there to the private sector, the nonprofit sector as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Naomi. I always add faith leaders to your list. I always think faith leaders in this country reach so many older people. Let's turn it over to the council for questions. Remember to pull your mic close, if you will. And what questions do you have? 5 more topics. Yes, Tony.
Let me just, probably more of a comment than a question, just reiterate the point Ms. Karp made about FinCEN. I'm a big FinCEN fan and worked with them in the financial fraud space, and I think not only can they help with the SARS issue that you and facilitating the use of SARS to identify financial exploitation, but also they can help with the data collection around that, which will help with the other issues that we've been talking about today. They have an amazing ability to collect and aggregate data and then to allow that data to be displayed in certain ways that inform our enforcement choices and other policy choices. And so I think they're definitely a great resource to use in that regard.
That's a great point, and I know Jennifer would want to make the same point I'm about to make, which is if you go online and take a look at the current issue of the STAR activity review, they have highlighted elder financial exploitation. They have trended what's been happening since they put out that initial bulletin. They've also taken a sample of those cases and analyzed them as far as who were the perpetrators and what were the types of abuse going on. Was it lottery scams? Was it power of attorney abuse, et cetera? And so I agree with you. We can really mine the data and you can learn a lot just from looking at that issue that just came out last week.
And I would like to say also that there's a fantastic training opportunity in here with the SARs. Very few people know about them. They're sort of mysterious for a good reason. But on the side of law enforcement and financial service folks working together, common in banking conferences and whatnot is how to write a good SAR, how to write an effective SAR. And as Lori was mentioning earlier, there's been some work with the broker-dealer community around this, and I think we have a lot of work to do in training law enforcement on how to access these and financial institution personnel on how to write up a SAR effectively for elder financial exploitation to support law enforcement in their investigation.
Interesting. Stacy?
And I think it has another application when it comes to agencies like ours in terms of how we can do some early intervention prevention, because clearly our Inspector General folks do participate in reviewing SARs, and it's very confidential, but our issue is how can we get out ahead of it up front, because our field staff need to have a better insight around what's going on. So if there's information about trending, what types of things are going on, this cross-agency communication, so we can have early alerts to say these are the types of scams that are going on. A lot of the little small things that we've experienced just working together when things came up resulted in our telling our workforce, be on the lookout for this because this is what's happening. So I think, beyond law enforcement and the financial industry, we got to take it down to the level of alerting the folks who work on a regular basis, the benefit issuance agencies, so we know. The more communication we have on the front end to try to prevent some of the pieces of fraudulent activity that's occurring, as opposed to our agencies getting involved on the back end when you're dealing with the Inspector General trying to investigate it.
Other questions, Erwin?
More of a comment from conversations I had in between the sessions and now also hearing about the need for outreach. Again, the Senior Corps Network, I think, would be a great opportunity in terms of partnerships. Across the 3 Senior Corps programs, we have national performance measures for the first time as of last year. And in RSVP, where we have 650 grantees, we have competitions for the first time since 1971 in terms of the grant renewals. And I think what we can do is we can work with partner federal agencies. If you can develop sort of toolkits that sort of are packaged outreach opportunities that our programs, our applicants can sort of pick up and utilize our volunteers as speakers for in their own communities, then there's also the opportunity for us to embed within our performance measures a service activity that could be something, and we can work with you all to actually have a category whether it's an elder justice intervention or elder financial abuse prevention outreach, so that we can then collect data on who's using your toolkits and actually then lead to the number of people that our volunteers are reaching. So what we can do is it's more of a commitment that it's particularly easy for us to reference other federal agencies like we do ACL. It's harder for us to reference specific nonprofit networks. But when we're working with federal agencies, what we can do is make a commitment to work with you all.
Thank you. Chuck.
Thank you. One of your recommendations is to bolster the ability of financial services providers to address financial exploitation. Obviously, my mind immediately thinks of depository institutions, banks, when we talk about that. And in fact, I think they oftentimes have been the leaders in terms of developing programs. But I'm wondering if you can respond to sort of 2 related questions. First, are there other examples of programs that have already been implemented that involve entities other than banks? And secondly, what other kinds of financial service providers do you think we should be particularly focusing on besides banks with regard to bolstering their ability to address financial exploitation?
I think I'll take a stab at your second one, although I'm a little hesitant to talk about entities that our agency doesn't have jurisdiction over. But, in my previous work, I think the whole investment world, broker-dealers and financial investment advisors and so forth, are equally concerned about many of the issues that banks and credit unions have been interested in, because, as I mentioned before, they see things happening to their clients, and they're concerned about them, and they don't know what to do about them. Obviously, money transmitters would be another category where they have a lot of opportunity on the front line to see a lot of this stuff going on. So those are a few that come to mind. Perhaps someone else on the panel knows about examples of successful programs with other sectors.
David might have.
I think one example, which I think Chuck has referred to actually in previous speeches,
I have a very short memory, so you'll have to remind me. Thank you.
Is the retail industry, which uses things like Green Dot, MoneyGram International, where the FTC gets complaint data, and that data is quite useful in terms of providing some picture of money transfer. Obviously, another facet of this industry is the processor aspect of the industry, which is, I think, a more diffuse area. And there I really confess I don't know of what data collection exists.
Can I pile on to a
Yeah,
question?
Melissa. Yeah.
And then I actually want to say something on a different topic related. State regulators, partners in this effort, how are we engaging them? Because the non-bank financial service providers are really an important piece of this.
Well, in Illinois and in North Carolina, where we've been working on convening stakeholders and facilitating their cooperation and collaboration around prevention, education, and response, these state regulators are very engaged in both of those networks and are really instrumental in helping engage the financial services community to come and talk. And again, that gets back to the whole training of learning each other's languages and building relationships and building trust, and collaborating the protocols and policy development so that they can all work together and understand what they can expect from each other.
Is there data collection happening, though, at the state level that's making its way? I think we had this conversation somewhat, so I must have a short memory here, too, but that is making its way back up to the federal level that would be plugged into what we're trying to...
There is a movement afoot in North Carolina to establish a data collection system around reports to adult protective services by financial institutions. And it would go through the state regulator. It would be a digital reporting system that would also hopefully potentially redistribute those reports to the appropriate law enforcement or adult protective service agency in the appropriate jurisdiction. And that would also gather data while it's at it. And perhaps trigger a SAR in the process. So there's a one-stop shop for the reporting for the financial institutions, and it's not a burden.
And I probably should really not talk on behalf of the FTC, but if I'm not mistaken, the FTC's Consumer Sentinel database has a lot of data that comes in from state, is it AGs? Or?
State AGs and other private entities as well.
Thank you.
Jennifer, did we miss you on a round earlier on responding? I'm trying to...
There was a question about training programs by money service providers. And I am aware that Western Union has been training its frontline staff and that the other, their competitors are climbing on. And I think, unfortunately, one of the indicators of effectiveness that I've heard about, it's a sad statement, is that when a training is deployed in one entity, the scammers point the seniors to go to the other one that hasn't been trained yet. And so I think you could say that's perhaps an indicator of success when the front line starts taking action. They just move them around. So,
Other questions? Melissa, did you have something else you wanted
I do.
to do? Sure. Anybody? Okay.
So I wanted to, one, on behalf of my colleagues at FinCEN, just sort of appreciate all of the attention and warmth that's being shown to them. I don't know that they always get that, so I'll be sure to relay it back to them. But I also wanted to come back to something Sean said and share a little bit about what we've been doing with the Direct Express program. And it's not to take away the importance of enforcement and the importance of detection that piece of it. But it is to recognize that there may be some consumer education that we could be thinking about, perhaps even differently than we've seen it done before. With the Direct Express program, this is the prepaid debit card that we are distributing Social Security and other federal benefits into if someone does not have an account into which they're direct depositing their their benefits. We are offering this Direct Express card product. So we're mindful of the importance both for the consumer but also for the economics of offering this type of product, that consumers or the benefit recipients really need to understand how to use that card smartly. And so over the past month, we have just unveiled a program called Pay Perks. And it's novel and it's different, and it may give everybody in this room a moment of pause as we've talked about the scams associated with sweepstakes. This is a program whereby Direct Express cardholders will receive a scratcher, I think is what they're called, which is an incentive to go online and take some financial education modules. And when they take those education modules, they are then enrolled in a small cash prize incentive program. But it's a way of recognizing folks like to participate in sweepstakes programs, and this is a way to get people online and learning about how to use that particular card in this instance in a smart way that avoids unnecessary fees, in a smart way that encourages cash back at point of sale. So I offer this because I think it's important as this work is getting underway that we're thinking about really creative ways to help the elderly think about their money and understand how it works, and to protect against really egregious products and offerings. And so there may be something there that we'd want to consider testing out as well. Silence in the room. It's either brilliant or it's terrible.
Brilliant. We'll call it brilliant. Let's go with it. Other things?
Kathy.
Yes, Stacey.
I just had one, which is always our ongoing challenge, and this is for Mr. West. Mr. West, we do want to work closer on determining and identifying what regulatory pieces around PII protection, what can be looked at that kind of mirrors, if you look at domestic violence side of the house, and also child protective services. In the event that someone is at risk of harm, exploitation, danger, that information sharing can be possible. Because on that side of the house, this is possible. And the challenge that we have is back to the issue of state courts who oversee guardianship and programs like ours. State courts are very interested in working with us, and they can right now give us information, but we cannot give them information. So to one degree, it helps, because if they have information about a guardian that they want to remove, and that person is a rep payee or even a fiduciary for VA, that's helpful. But if we have someone that we've identified as committing exploitation or fraud, we cannot tell them. And this is embedded, there are GAO reports that go back to 2004, 2006. We need to really research down what is the challenge, because I do know from my work in human services on child protective services side and domestic violence side, there are instances where you can waive that issue if you're protecting someone or their resources. So we just want to acknowledge and put that back on the table.
I'm glad you have put that on the table, and I couldn't agree more. I think that there are a number of to back up, one of the observations that many of us have made is that when you're talking about elder abuse, one of the things we've recognized in many ways, we're sort of 20, 30 years behind where we are in DV, where we are in child abuse and neglect, and many of the same issues are posing challenges to us. when it comes to this type of information, I think part of it is the rules and laws that are in place that we're going to have to figure out ways to work together to modernize. I think that, but also, a question is how do you actually handle the information? And I think there has to be an assurance that information is going to be handled properly and handled in a way that protects the privacy interests that are at stake. And so I think, and we can do that. We can do that partly through technology. We can do that through protocols. We can do that. And so, but I couldn't agree with you more. That is one area where the interagency process, I think, helps to facilitate solutions. But until we're able to figure that piece out, you're always going to be limited. And so, particularly when it comes to federal-state cooperation, that's a critical piece to work through.
Thank you. Well, I'm watching my time, but be quick.
I'll be really quick. I'm really glad to hear what you've had to say. One of the problems in this area is that you have this tension between privacy and safety, and one thing that I know we've heard from financial services providers is, we've heard them say, choose your lawsuit, particularly if they're in a state where they might be a mandatory reporter, or they just feel there's an ethical obligation to report, and on the other hand, they have the privacy rule, and they're afraid, on the one hand, are they going to get sued for violating the privacy rule? On the other hand, are they going to get sued because they didn't protect their client? So we do need to figure out a way out of this conundrum, because in the meantime, it's kind of paralysis.
All right, please help me thank the panel. Thank you all very much. Well, council members, thanks for being here, and more than your presence, thanks for the ongoing commitment of your agencies to work with the Coordinating Council and the staff time to support us. I mean, we have wonderful staff working from the various agencies at the working group level. If there are other federal agencies that are not involved in the working group, they're welcome to join. You should just reach out, let someone know. You can volunteer other people from the working group for the working group if you've got other agencies you would like to pull in. Let me tell you what to expect kind of next. The working group is going to kind of process the day, figure out kind of what they've heard. We will be looking to put a tool up on the ACL website so the public can comment and be able to pull those comments in. We will send a notice to everyone once that's available, because we certainly welcome public input. And then we are anticipating having another meeting in the fall where we can talk about the implementation strategies. We are expecting that cost will come up in some of the working groups I've slipped into. I know cost is something that staff are very well aware of. I also wanted to point out, don't want to miss any opportunity to talk about World Elder Abuse Awareness Day. It is next month. Means it's been almost a year since we had our legendary event that the White House sponsored for World Elder Abuse Awareness Day. It is on June 15th. On June 14th this year, we have been working with the U.S. mission to the United Nations and the Government of Canada, and we will be doing a World Elder Abuse Awareness Day event at the United Nations. And it's scheduled kind of as an event in two parts. The first part will be the governmental and UN perspectives, where we'll hear from UN, U.S., Canada, and other nations. The second part will be an NGO perspective and reception, where AARP, HelpAge International, and the UN NGO Committee on Aging will also participate. So we will be sending out information so that you know about it. I think there's some limitation on our ability to include everybody, but we also will web stream that event. You don't have to come to New York to celebrate World Elder Abuse Awareness Day. You can do your own thing, and we would encourage you and everyone around the country to find this as another occasion. I think one of the best things personally for working on this is the feeling that we're not alone, that we're in a group of other people who care about this topic. World Elder Abuse Awareness Day is another one of those opportunities. I find that every time I ask someone to help, they're willing to, and so please use this as a way to do some community organizing and education next month. So we'll see you all in the fall, if not before. Thanks again for your participation. Thank you. Okay, we will not.